All right, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. So hello again, good morning and good afternoon to everyone that is joining us for today's webinar, Foster Care Children and Youth and the Risk of Commercial Sexual Exploitation. My name is Brittany and I am Shared Hope's Director of Training. It is a privilege to have you all joining with us this month as it is Foster Care Month. We are delighted to learn with you today as we discuss this important topic with our expert panelists. Before I introduce them, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping notes with you. Let me switch the slide here. All attendees are on mute. This webinar is being recorded and transcribed. If you'd like to ask a question, you can type it into the question box so our moderators can ask the panelists on your behalf at the end of the webinar. If we have time today, we hope to get to Q&A. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you can also type into that question box so that our webinar organizer can assist you with that. And we always just like to include a warning here. This discussion forum may contain content that's not suitable for all audiences, so viewer discretion is advised. For our guests in the audience, we just wanted to, that might not be familiar with Shared Hope International, we just wanted to give you a brief introduction of our work here. Shared Hope International is a nonprofit organization fighting for children and youth who are being bought and sold for sex in the United States. We take a three-pronged approach: preventing the conditions that foster sex trafficking, restoring and empowering survivors, and bringing justice to vulnerable youth. All right, and now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our panelists and ask them to each take a few minutes to tell you about themselves. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sarah now. Sarah Ladd is the Human Trafficking Child Protection Program Coordinator with the Minnesota DHS Child Safety and Permanency Division. Sarah, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. As was stated, my name is Sarah, and I am really happy to be here with you all today. I currently serve as the statewide policy lead in the state of Minnesota at the Department of Human Services, working on the child welfare system response to trafficking, exploitation of children and youth. I am in that role, also part of our statewide Safe Harbor leadership team, which is co-led by the Department of Health, Department of Public Safety, and us at the Department of Human Services. So I am really excited to be here with you all today to talk about this important topic. And I want to share with you also that really my passion for the work that I do is really all about elevating the voices of survivors of trafficking and exploitation. People who have lived this are the true experts and should be treated as subject matter experts. And so anything that we all can do to partner and really elevate their voices and make sure that they have a seat at the table in developing the policies and developing the responses that will work. As we are working with foster youth who are vulnerable for or experiencing trafficking, that should be a priority for us. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, Sarah. Thank you very much. Barbara Amaya is the Director of Survivor Leadership at the Anti-Trafficking International and a member of the ECPAT Survivors Council. So Barbara, please share more with us.
Sure, I'd love to. Yes, I am pleased and honored to say that I am Director of Survivor Engagement and Leadership at ATI, Anti-Trafficking International, with Mr. Bill Wolf and all of our other fantastic team members. Also, I'm a longtime member of ECPAT's Survivor Council, and I really am very pleased when all organizations include the expert survivor voice in any aspect, all aspects. And I'm also the author of my memoir, Nobody's Girl, a memoir of lost innocence, modern day slavery and transformation, which does include a lengthy resource and information guide. I have another book coming out, Life Lessons from the Street, which includes a lot of a lot more information and data about my experience of surviving being exploited and trafficked for over a decade. So that's it.
Thanks so much, Barbara. We're really glad that you are able to join us today.
Thank you.
All right, and I'd like to introduce our next panelist. Dr. Karen Lambie is a Shared Hope Ambassador of Hope volunteer, and she has a long history of advocating for youth. Karen, what else would you like to share with us?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate being allowed to be on this panel today. And I have been a teacher for about 32 years. I'm retired at the moment, and I have taught at the elementary level and also the university level. And in addition to being a Shared Hope volunteer, I am also a member of the Georgia statewide human trafficking task force, and I have spoken to a variety of audiences about, most specifically about the sex trafficking of minors, and I've been speaking on this issue for about 8 years now. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Awesome. All right, and I would also like to introduce Meiko Taylor. Meiko is the CEO of the Power Project. Welcome, Meiko. We're so glad you could join us. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about the work you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here, joining you guys from sunny Los Angeles, California. And so, yeah, I am the CEO of the Power Project. I also am a filmmaker here in Los Angeles who's working in media to bring awareness to human trafficking as well. So I'll tell you a little bit more about me, but I'm looking forward to just sharing today. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, Meiko. Well, we're glad that you're joining us today too. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the questioning. We have a lot to cover today, but we're so glad to have you all with us. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and I'm going to ask all of the presenters to come back on camera, those of you who are able to join by camera, and we're going to jump right in. So first, we would like to establish our baseline, discussing exactly what foster care is and why children and youth in the foster care system might be more at risk of commercial sexual exploitation. So to start us off, Sarah, can you please share with us what is the foster care system, why is it used, and what are we looking at in terms of numbers of youth and families involved?
Absolutely. So when we talk about foster care in the United States, that is often, there's a bit of a misnomer where we tend to think of foster care and child protection as being one and the same. And so I want to start by just saying that the broad umbrella that we are talking about what we're talking about is really child welfare system response, which can look a lot of different ways. And one part of it is the foster care system. Foster care happens, a child goes into the foster care system when it is determined that it's not safe for them to stay with the parents or caregivers, with their parents or caregivers in their home. So then they are put into out of home placement, okay? And the bigger name for that is foster care, okay? Now, once a child is in foster care, there are a lot of different types of places that they could go, okay? So they could go, and actually a large number of kids, about half, end up going into foster homes with individual families who are licensed to provide foster care. About 49% in the most recent snapshot of data in 2018 have gone into family foster homes. Now, about another 30% go into the home of a relative. Okay, so, and actually in our federal laws in our country, it is required that child welfare staff who are looking to place a child outside of their home have to first consider relatives and do a search of relatives that may be available to take care of that child. Then the second preference is for a family foster home. And finally, the last preference would be for a group home or residential setting that has multiple children, a congregate setting. So only about 10% of kids end up going into that type of a placement. So the other thing that I'll say about this is numbers wise, how big is the foster care system? Also at that point in time, across the US, there are about 430,000 children in the foster care system. The average length of time is 1 to 2 years. So, but there are some children who are there much shorter and some children who are there for much longer time, even 5 years or more. So when we're talking generally about the foster care system, that's what we see in the United States. And we do experience, for example, us here in Minnesota, we do experience high numbers of children who are reported to Child Protection for experiencing trafficking or exploitation. But we see only a small percentage of those kids actually go into the foster care system or go into out-of-home placement. So again, that looks different everywhere in the United States, but that is a little bit of a sense of what we see in terms of that intersection. And then one final point I'll make is that there is a big difference in law and in practice everywhere in the United States when it comes to American Indian children who are in need of out-of-home placement for some reason. So there is a federal law called the Indian Child Welfare Act that's been in effect since 1978 that changes the way that placements happen and what it looks like for an American Indian child who is an enrolled member of a tribe or has tribal heritage when they go into the foster care system.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was great background and really important information to include. So to move on that, Karen, we have a lot of audience members joining us today that might not be familiar with why foster care children and youth are at risk of commercial sexual exploitation. Can you please lay the groundwork for us?
Sure, yes, I'd be happy to. And I can't remember if I had mentioned this in my introduction, but my husband and I have been foster parents for 14 years. So I'm very familiar with foster children and the child welfare system, at least in the state of Georgia. Yes, there are several factors that put foster children at high risk for trafficking. And one of those is many of these children feel and may be unloved, and they have also been neglected. Also, because of their home backgrounds, a lot of these children that come into foster care have very low self-esteem. Often we see foster children run away. They will run away from foster homes. They will run away from group homes, and so some of them might feel safe running to a homeless shelter, but they're actually not safe at all if they run away. Any child who runs away is not safe from trafficking or from pedophiles. The traffickers are out there on the streets watching for runaway children. These children have a history of trauma, many of them from their home environments. So a lot of them have, when they come to us as foster children, they have PTSD, they have severe depression. They also may have been sexually abused, and any child that has experienced sexual abuse is at very high risk for sex trafficking. It's like this has sort of been almost normalized to them. And often they are given the message, if they have been sexually abused, that this is all that they are good for. Often we may get foster children who fall into the LGBTQ plus population. A lot of these children and youth are literally thrown out of their own homes by their family. So these children, may be out on the street homeless. And homelessness is a very high risk for trafficking. Older kids also who have been in the foster care system for several years and who sort of know how it works, and maybe who have gone from one home to another home to another home, will actually see themselves as a paycheck. They come to realize that the foster family actually gets paid on a monthly basis for having them in their own home. And so, it's easy for them to think that, that this is another thing that I'm good for. I'm good for making money for somebody. So they see themselves as a money maker, as a paycheck for somebody else. And also another thing that puts these children at risk is when they do age out of the system. A lot of these children, when they come out of foster care, they don't have any other place to go. They may not have a biological family to go back to. They may be unemployed. They may not be in school. And so they may find themselves homeless. And as we have already mentioned, homelessness is a very high risk factor that puts children and youth at high risk for trafficking.
Thanks, Karen. You talked about a lot of really great points, all very difficult to grasp, and you wish that weren't the case, right? And you talked about aging out. That's something we're going to talk about a little more detail later in today's conversation. So we know that there are some aspects of being in foster care that create vulnerabilities, and that there are vulnerabilities that lead to foster care involvement. Barbara, can you help us expand on what vulnerabilities of foster youth are the result of experiences that led to them being in the foster care system? Similarly, how does the foster care system itself create vulnerabilities and or compound those existing vulnerabilities?
All right. Some very important points have been addressed already, and you asked me in particular to speak about the vulnerabilities that can lead to a child and children being placed in foster care. And we could spend this whole panel and webinar addressing this point right here. It's multifaceted, right? Why would a child be taken out of their home that they were brought up in and placed in a completely new environment? There are many. Anywhere from sexual abuse, the complete family breakdown, different illnesses, and a lot of, unfortunately, substance abuse issues can cause a child to be placed into foster care. All of these issues are traumatic to the child, right? These factors alone, all of these issues that I'm listing here, lead to extreme vulnerability, and then even further vulnerability, in being placed in a completely new environment. I don't like to quote statistics because I often think they're all over the place. But I've seen one that said, 80% of children placed in the foster care system require extensive mental health intervention, right? And 90% of children in foster care have been exposed to trauma. I think personally it might be 100%. If you'd like, I can speak very briefly here about my personal experiences as I went through the juvenile justice and foster care systems myself. Because of early sexual abuse, I was taken out of my home in Fairfax, Virginia, and I went through the foster care system, and I was placed in multiple group homes. And I, like many other children, would run away from these foster care placements, and I was searching for what all children need: food, love, shelter, attention, and discipline. And unfortunately, whenever there are vulnerable people around, especially children who are vulnerable because they're children, there are traffickers, human traffickers, waiting to exploit them because they're predators. So unfortunately, I was under the control of a trafficker for over a decade. When I would run away and escape from these different placements, it's about addressing the child's vulnerability in the first place and making sure that there are extensive screening processes and therapies in place so that this child can begin to heal. I mean, to me, that's the bottom line. So.
Thanks so much, Barbara, for sharing with us and sharing about your personal experience and the expertise you have. I'd like to transition to addressing how these vulnerabilities can put foster youth at risk. So, Meiko, can you please share with us some of the grooming tactics a trafficker might implement, taking advantage of some of the vulnerabilities that Karen and Barbara outlined?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually want to start out by just touching on where recruitment happens, because I think where it happens can determine the approach that's taken to bring youth in. So some of the places we see online recruitment, and that could be on social media sites, Instagram, gaming, even when anything that really has like a direct message mechanism, they're reaching out to youth that way. You may see it in shopping malls where you have someone walking around handing out flyers to young ladies saying, "Oh, you're beautiful. You could be a model. Come to this casting call." And it turns out not to be the casting call that they thought they were auditioning for when they get there. You also have schools. So like Barbara said, really anywhere that youth are, that can be where a trafficker can hang out. And so I went and did a presentation at a high school here in Los Angeles, and some of the youth did share that there are traffickers standing outside when school is over with, or they're waiting outside to see who's playing hooky and who's running away from school, and can they grab them up really quick. And then also big is in the group homes here, which is what we're talking about today. So you see a lot of recruitment happening there. The biggest recruitment tactics that I've seen in my work are building relationships, really. And so youth are typically first exploited by someone that they know. And so in the group homes especially, we are seeing peer recruitment happening, where that is a fellow youth that may befriend another youth that's at the group home, whether that's to give them protection, just to give them friendship, companionship, whatever the case may be. They are befriending them and recruiting them, offering them incentives. Usually what I see is they show them maybe a social media page. "Oh, I'm living the life, I'm making money," or, it could be even more subtle than that. But they ultimately get the youth to run away with them to attend a party or something over the weekend, and then that youth may never come back because the recruiter has introduced him to their trafficker. I also see it happening huge with intimate partners. And that's really where the trafficker is starting a fake relationship, and the youth, unbeknownst to the youth, of course, they think they are in love and that this is someone that really cares about them. And so the goal really is to earn their love, their trust, their respect. And then these relationships, they may start out appearing real to the youth, right? And then later start to show signs of unhealth. And so you have someone that ends up creating a trauma bond with the youth, where they are intermittently treating them great and whining and dining them, supporting them, loving on them, and then you have intermittent periods where they are abusing them. And so as a youth, and the average age is about 15. I hate statistics too, Barbara, so I'm with you on that. But the average age of kids being recruited is about 15 years old. It used to be 12 to 14, but thankfully it sounds like it's moving a little bit. And so with that being said, you have a 15-year-old that is maybe dating an older man, maybe in his 30s, 40s. How on earth can she really really compete with that. When he has profiled her and he is, you know, getting in her head and getting in her heart, and he doesn't even have to do anything violent because he can control that relationship and threaten to take it away or to, you know, treat her poorly and things like that. And so you have youth getting really invested in these relationships, and then they're coerced, they're tricked, or sometimes even forced into trafficking. You also see familial trafficking, which is where kids are being trafficked by their family members. I remember attending a training just about trafficking of boys, and the trainer actually shared a story about how his parents, when I think he was like 7 or 8, they began trafficking him as a young boy to support their substance abuse habits. And so, like I said, online recruiting is super. So I just gave you like some ideas about what it really looks like online. You usually see someone sliding into the DMs, right? Going into their direct messages. And so it may start out by attention bombing. The person is liking all of their pictures. Now, listen, I'm going to at least check out your page if you like 20 of my pictures. I'm just keeping it real. And so the traffickers know that, and they're going to attention bomb the kids. And so they like all the pictures, they go into the DMs. Social media is really huge because the traffickers, they're great profilers. And so they're able to go onto the webpage of this youth and see, where do they go to school? Do they like sports? Oh, they're waiting for the new Jordans to come out, or they want that new iPhone, or they like this artist. They're looking for things that they can connect with on a personal level with that youth. And so so they definitely scour their pages, start to talk with them. And the goal is really to move that conversation offline. One of the ways that you can recognize if it's a trafficker, the conversation turns sexual really quickly. They're like, oh, I'm in love with you. You met me 30 minutes ago. How does that even work? That's not even real. But the kids, you know, they're all right. I know, I understand. I would love me too, because I'm cute, right? And so they're thinking in those terms. So they start a conversation. They're asking the youth for sexually explicit pictures, photos, videos, and then they kind of get into this thing. So it can go one of two ways. It can be sextortion, where they're looking to continue to get content from the youth. So they're threatening to put that content out online, or they're trying to take the conversation offline and meet in person so that they can exploit that youth themselves, or actually sleep with them themselves. And so just to wrap it all up, to talk a little bit about the grooming process, once you do have them in front of you, once that relationship is in person, it kind of follows a general process in terms of the grooming. And so the potential process can be targeting the victim. So whether that's online, in person, in some of these places that I just mentioned, recruitment happens. But there is a process of gaining trust from that youth and really supporting them, loving on them, whatever they need. Like I said, traffickers are great profilers. So if a youth has low self-esteem, like Karen mentioned, okay, then I'm going to try to build her up and make her feel beautiful. If a youth thinks very highly of themselves, okay, well then I'm gonna maybe try to break her down a little bit and keep her guessing if I'm really into her or not, and things like that. And then they look for the vulnerabilities, whether that's love, whether that's a place to stay, whether that's food. So it doesn't always have to be it could be that you love your little sister, right? And so, oh, well, you're not going to do what I'm asking you to do. That's fine. I know where your sister goes to school. I'll go get her instead. And so even the love of a sibling can become a vulnerability, right? And so what they really try to do is fill a need, whether that's being a friend, lover, providing basic needs, buying gifts. And then there's a process of isolation where they really try to separate the youth from their support systems. Anybody that can pull that kid's coattail and say, you're tripping, he's not good for you, or she's not good for you, because let's keep it real, traffickers can be men and women. Anybody that can talk some sense into you, they do not want you around that. And so you see kids start to retreat from everyone in their lives that really cares about them and loves them and can see this situation for what it really is. And you start to see them really only spending their time with that trafficker. Once they feel like they've got their hooks in them, then abuse may begin. So it could be going back and forth. Oh, if you really loved me, you would help me out by making this money. Oh, I'm short on the rent. There's a way that we can get this real quick. Why don't you just go out there and do X, Y, and Z? Or, oh, well, okay, I was just gonna find somebody else. You don't really love me. And so it can be different things like that. So that's emotional abuse, but it can also be physical, where they are being beaten, they are being kept from eating. They are being kept from interacting with family members and anybody that cares about them. And then once that happens, the goal is just to maintain control in whatever way that can be. And so you have traffickers that use threats, that use violence, that use blackmail. I know there was a youth that talked to me about how she wanted to leave. She reached out to her mom to ask her mom to pick her up from where the trafficker had her, and the trafficker texted her a picture sitting outside her mother's house, saying if you ever contact her to have her pick you up, it's going to be a problem. And so that's it. That's all I got to say. But yeah, those are some of the ways that this happens and how this looks.
Meiko, that was a wealth of information. Thanks so much for sharing. It's amazing and awful how quickly those grooming tactics can be implemented. Barbara, you mentioned to me that you had something you wanted to add.
Oh, well, after hearing Meiko, she's very much on point. I can see that you have the full education from some fantastic survivor experts there. I'm listening to you, just very, very, very much on point. Thank you for that. Yeah, I was listening and thinking of my own experiences, my own story, and I wanted to just briefly share that in my own case, after running away from a foster care placement, I was in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. A young woman approached me. She seemed very nice. I was probably hungry and cold, nowhere to stay. She started chatting me up and talking to me. I ended up at her appointment. Once again, a young woman, not some, horrible older man. It was a young woman. I go back with her to her apartment. She introduces me to her boyfriend, which was, in reality, her trafficker. And, thinking back on that day now, I think probably she'd been like I was one point in her life. Probably she'd been a young, vulnerable child. But, here she was as a younger adult woman and sent out to recruit young, vulnerable children like I was. I'm back with them in their apartment, and she mainly interacted with me, and they began grooming me for purposes of prostitution, and sending me out and taking me out to different adult men and selling me to these adults. I never saw any of the money. Money didn't mean anything to me. I was a child. What meant something to me was their approval and feeling good that they were happy. The brain doesn't differentiate. The brain, if it's a child coming home with an A on a report card, and the parents are happy and the child is happy and everybody's happy and that's all good. It's the same thing when a child is vulnerable and needy and has been experiencing horrific trauma. So I was happy that they were happy, and that went on for several weeks, and one day they handed me off another adult man on the streets of our nation's capital, and he took me to New York. That was the trafficker who ended up controlling me and exploiting me for over a decade. As I listened to Meiko talk, she talked about, different ways that traffickers are targeting vulnerable children. And, it's not all happening online. A majority of it is. It's still happening in the streets. But these gaming sites that children are on, and Twitch and all the other ones, they're on these sites and they think they're talking to another young person, and they're entering into these conversations in their living room, in their home, while maybe their parents aren't in their room watching what they're doing. Maybe their parents aren't even there. The number of so-called latchkey children is horrific, right? Everybody's working. So they're entering into these conversations with someone that they think is their friend, who is definitely not their friend. And, this person, as Meiko said, is, targeting and listening very closely to what this child is saying. Maybe this child is saying, I hate my mother. She made me take out the trash. And, this person, this adult, predator is commiserating with this child and saying, I understand you, I get you, I know exactly what you mean. Hey, let's go over to WhatsApp, let's go to Hangouts. And the reason they take the child off of these sites is because these other sites are encrypted and untraceable. And, they're taking the child off and they're talking to them and they're getting them to meet in person. There was a case fairly recently where two young adult women, teenagers, were at an airport. They went to pick up their tickets, and thank goodness the ticket agent had received training in identifying possible human trafficking victims. And this ticket agent was like, wait a minute, what's up? Can I see your ID? Who sent you these tickets? And the teenagers were very angry. They were like, what are you talking about? We're going to New York to be in a music video. And at any rate, law enforcement came in and they actually were able, unusually, this normally doesn't go down like this, unfortunately, they were able to track down the person that sent these teenagers these tickets, and he was a known trafficker. They knew who he was. They were able to track him down. And that normally, unfortunately, doesn't happen like that, but it needs to happen like that. More people need training on identifying possible victims, right? Especially, people in the travel industry, but at any rate. So yes, I was very vulnerable. I was taken in, and I was groomed, for lack of a better word, for the purposes of prostitution. And then I was exploited for over a decade because I was so vulnerable in the first place, right? Children are vulnerable just because they're children, right? But any child that has experienced any type of trauma becomes even more vulnerable. And as Meiko mentioned, the trauma bond, in my personal opinion, is the main method of control for sex traffickers, right? There are certain precursors that need to be in place for the trauma bond, or Stockholm syndrome, for those that don't know, to be in place, right? One of them is fear for one's life. Another one is taking on the worldview of the predator or the trafficker. When they handed me over to this human trafficker that drove me to New York City, he began that process. I went to change the station on the car radio. I reached my hand over and he slapped it away, and I was shocked. I hadn't experienced that much aggression and kind of a little bit of violence yet in my life. It was to come, but not quite yet, and he began that process, and he made sure that I saw that he had a Glock in his belt. He made sure that I began to fear for my life. But at the same time, he also made sure that he framed himself as my protector. He said things to me like, I understand exactly what you're, I know who you are. I understand. I feel for you. I get it. It was sucked. It was horrible in your home. I know you don't ever have to see those people again. I'm here for you. I'll protect you. He didn't know anything about me. These were, conversations, that he had with many, unfortunately, young men and women, and so that trauma bond began to be put into place that very night when he drove me to New York City. And unfortunately, it's happening right now as we speak, right? And until we can, I'll stop right now. But I just wanted to share that when I was listening to Meiko, it was so on point. Thank you, Meiko.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, for sharing all of that about your experience. I think it really helps us paint the picture and understand what we're facing here. Sarah, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just quickly, absolutely right, everything that was shared. I will say, just to support what Meiko was sharing, we do see, we were surprised initially when sex trafficking became a mandated report in the state of Minnesota, that we found within our first, we're now at 4 years to the day since sex trafficking became a mandated report here. We have seen that over half of alleged traffickers and exploiters here in Minnesota are family members. They are relatives, siblings, parents, caregivers, people who live with the child. So I just want to highlight that point that Meiko made briefly. We often don't think of that when we talk about children who experience trafficking. And this includes also, unfortunately, foster parents, pre-adoptive parents, foster siblings, people who are with the child in the home. We also do see many children of any age. So here for us in the last 4 years, we've seen that about 20% of children who are alleged to have experienced sex trafficking or exploitation are under the age of 12. So they can be any age. And I know I point that out because the absolutely correct what you shared from my experience in terms of recruitment and grooming, but I do want to give a little caveat that it can look pretty different when you're talking about a younger child. Obviously, they're not going to have a Facebook page or be engaged in some of those same things. So just keeping those two in mind. And then the final really quick thing I'll say is that we also see a very high incidence when youth are recruited into sex trafficking situations, that they often are also asked or forced to do other things beyond have those sexual contacts with people. And so that quickly can turn into labor trafficking, which is the youth being forced or tricked into doing other things, not sexual in nature, but other kinds of things, criminal or work type things. So I just want to point that out too, that we see that often with our foster youth, and that's another thing that their vulnerability can lead to. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah, for pointing out some of those really important distinctions. I'm glad you brought those up. Karen, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about grooming, just because I know that this is something that's really, you have a lot of research on this. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, actually, everyone did an awesome job of summing up grooming and what it looks like and how it happens. And what I would just briefly like to add is a couple of things that were brought up that a lot of people do not realize, and that is that family members can actually be traffickers. They will sell members of their own family. We had a foster child who was in that kind of situation. That's very shocking to people. You know, you can't wrap your head around any of this, but I mean, a parent or aunt, uncle, grandparent, brother, sister selling a child in their own family is very shocking. Another thing that was mentioned that a lot of people do not realize is that boys are also victims, not just of maybe labor trafficking, but of sex trafficking. A lot of people are, you know, you mentioned sex trafficking or prostitution, pornography, whatever, and immediately you think of girls and women. But we have to remember that our boys can also become victims. And the last thing is the fact that it isn't just men or boys, older boys who are traffickers. Women can also be traffickers as well. So those are the things that I would just wanted to throw out there too.
Yeah, those really important details to add. So thank you, Karen. Now that we've discussed vulnerabilities and risks, I'd like to discuss how we can better support foster children and youth. So in 2018, there was 2018 federal legislation called Families First that sought to reduce out-of-home placements and strengthen families, ultimately striving to prevent maltreatment and system dependency by permitting Title IV-E funding to be applied to prevention services for the child and the family. That's just some background information. Sarah, you mentioned in an earlier discussion that all states have to develop a definition of youth at risk, and in fact, it's due in October, that definition. Can you please explain that required definition and also a bit about how research indicates children that are able to stay in their own families, communities, or a safe space for their identity and cultural expression and support have better outcomes, generally speaking?
Yeah, so it's a big topic. I will try to quickly explain. The federal law, the Family First Prevention Service Act of 2018, has two main components to it. One is what Brittany just mentioned, which is the use of federal money to pay for placement prevention services to try and keep kids in their home and in their family. The second big part of this law, which is the part that has to be implemented by October 1st of this year for states to continue receiving the millions of dollars that they get to pay for foster care placements, all states need to kind of redesign the way that they do out-of-home placement. And so this is a big game changer, a total change in the foster care system in the United States. And specifically, there are now, under this law, the intent is, as you mentioned, to keep kids in their home or in their family or in their community or in a family-like setting, in that order of preference. And if that's not possible and they have to go into a group home setting, the law tries to basically set up safeguards to make it as hard as possible to put them in a group home setting. Just speaking frankly, that's the intent, the spirit of the law. And that's because research does indicate that children have better outcomes long-term in education, in relationships, in employment, in health, in many different areas, if they are able to stay with their family, with their parents, in their home community, and in a family-like setting, if that is not possible. So this new law sets up 4 different types of residential group placement. Those are the only types of settings that can receive this money going forward. So basically what will happen is that any child who goes into out-of-home placement and there's not a family, there's not a foster family or a relative or anyone who can take them in and provide care for them, if they have to go into a group setting, in order for the setting to get paid after the first 2 weeks, they have to either be a qualified residential treatment program that provides specific residential treatment for youth with severe mental health needs, or they have to be a specialized setting that serves pregnant or parenting youth, or the third is they have to be a specialized setting that serves youth who have been or are at risk of sex trafficking, or fourth, it has to be a supervised independent living setting for older youth who are aging out and in extended foster care. Those are the only options. So it very much limits, it makes all states come up with a plan and change their laws so that they can have youth go into these types of settings. So in order to have youth, now zooming in on the settings, for youth who have been sex trafficked or are at risk of sex trafficking, in order to place youth in those types of settings, states need to define what it means to be sex trafficked and what it means to be at risk for sex trafficking. So because sex trafficking already, other federal laws such as the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act already made changes to the main child abuse law in the United States and required that trafficking be a type of child abuse, many states already had sex trafficking defined. But the term at risk for sex trafficking was not defined by many states. It certainly was not here in Minnesota until about 3 weeks ago. So we, along with many states across the country over the last couple of years, really brought together research, brought together survivors as subject matter experts, looked at our laws, looked at other policies, talked to people on the ground who are working day in and day out with youth who experience trafficking, and we came up with a definition for our state here in Minnesota that when youth meet this definition, they will be considered at risk for sex trafficking for purposes of placement. And they can then they can be placed by a child welfare agency or a court, they can be placed into a specialized group home setting that will be required to have staff who are trained in recruitment and grooming and safety and all trauma, all of these things that we've been talking about, and they'll be required to offer human trafficking prevention education at the group level and individually for these youth, in addition to specialized individualized services for youth who are at risk of sex trafficking and for youth who have experienced sex trafficking already. So every state is doing this differently, I want to say. If you are in Georgia as you are, or California as you are, wherever you are, your state is doing something with this, or they're losing millions of dollars and they're going to pay for their foster care placements a different way. So either way, every state has to deal with this and has to make some big changes to what it means to be in foster care, particularly in a group home setting. I don't know if you would like me to go into the details about what our at-risk definition is. I can also include a link to our website and to our policy bulletin that lays out the definition of at-risk for sex trafficking if people are interested in seeing that after the webinar.
Yeah, that would be great, Sarah. Thanks for explaining all that background information. I feel, well, much more informed about that Families First Act and everything that you've explained. It's great to hear that there will be mandatory training. Yes, we will, if you could get me that link, we'll go ahead and make sure to include that in the email that goes out to attendees post-webinar. So I want to also talk about parents and caregivers. So Karen, what can foster parents and caregivers do in partnership with youth to help avoid risks associated with commercial sexual exploitation? How can parents and guardians help navigate these complicated systems for children and youth?
Yes, and of course, this is very complicated, as we have talked about the many factors that put these children at high risk for trafficking. But one thing that they absolutely must have is they need to feel loved and accepted for who they are. So we need to have foster parents who are really, really serious about fostering children, whether they have already been in a sex trafficking situation or not. We know that if they come into foster care, they're already at high risk for sex trafficking for the many different reasons that we have already mentioned. So they need to be loved and accepted for who they are. They need unconditional love. Foster parents also need to gain the trust of these children. They have been in so many situations, more than likely, where they have maybe trusted an adult, and then that trust has been squashed. So foster parents need to let the foster children know that they are someone that the child can come to with anything, that they can trust these people. Excuse me. Foster children need to feel like they are part of a family. So if you already have children, if you're a foster parent and you already have your own biological children, or you have other children in your home, you need to let the foster children, maybe that you have just received, you need to let them feel that they are a part of the family. And so making a child feel that they're a part of a family could be something as simple as having a game night. Age appropriate games, of course, or a movie night, age appropriate movies, popcorn, and everybody sit around the den or whatever, watching movies, playing games. You also need to as you get to know these children, what you need to do is focus on their strengths. And if you find out that they're interested in whatever, art, sports, enroll them in an art class, and get them to play Little League baseball or whatever. Put them in music classes, put them in ballet classes. So find out what they're interested in, and do whatever you can do to build on those strengths, and show these children that you are interested in them. You're interested in what they are interested in. You're interested in any hobbies that they may have or develop. Excuse me. And establish realistic goals. We want these children to be successful. And so in my opinion, one way to keep children safe from all of these, predators that are out there, they need to know that they can achieve goals. And so give them realistic goals to achieve, and then talk about those achievements, no matter how small the achievement may seem. Allow them to help with decision making and problem solving. Like, for example, depending on your, children and family services that you're dealing with, county by county, it may be different. But if you are allowed, excuse me, to take a child out of town or out of state on a vacation, or if you're just planning something for the weekend, let those foster children be a part of the planning and the decision making as to what they're going to do. Where are you going to go? Are you going to go to the park on Saturday? Are you going to go to a recreation facility? Or, so let them be a part of that planning and decision making and problem solving. Also, here in the state of Georgia, excuse me, we have classes. We have independent living classes for foster children when they are about to age out. And so, these classes help children or youth with learning job skills, finding jobs, learning how to, manage your money. So it's life skills that these children, they need to be learning, and before they are actually, turned loose from the foster care system. And also along those same lines, foster parents, you need to remember that you are a role model for these children. And so, they're watching what you're doing too. So you need to be a role model for these children, the way that you're running your own life. And so that about, sums it up. So they need love and nurturing and acceptance, and they need the love and acceptance even more than they need praise. But when they do something well, they accomplish a goal, no matter how small, let them know that you're very proud of what they have done, their accomplishments.
Thanks so much, Karen. It sounds like love and encouragement and support are really important themes in building those relationships. Oh, one more thing.
I'm sorry. Oh, a big thing. I don't know how this went out of my head, but a big thing is you need to talk to your children about sex trafficking. You need to,
Yeah, it's a big thing.
Yeah, and you need to teach them, without scaring them to death. But they need to know that traffickers are out there. You need to let them know what grooming looks like. You need to let them know safety measures that they can take, even, as very young children. And it has to go beyond stranger danger. We teach that in schools, and it has to go beyond good touch, bad touch. We also teach that in schools as well, we should. But when we're talking about sex trafficking, we have to go above and beyond those types of things. We've already talked about the internet. So these kids need to start learning internet safety at a very early age because, I mean, if there's something that I can't do on my computer, I can go out and find a 5-year-old who can help. So these kids are very computer savvy at a very early age, so they need to be learning internet safety for sure. And even things like, if they're at a party, don't accept drinks or food that are given to you by someone you don't know or someone that you don't know well.
Mm-hmm.
So, and and like I think it was Meiko who mentioned, somebody coming up to you in the mall and telling you how beautiful you are and how handsome you are if you're a boy and whatever. And, I can make you a movie star or a model. You need to let kids know that these kinds of things can happen. So you need to go ahead and start having those conversations. And like I said, not just with your girls, but also with your boys.
Yeah, no, great point to add. I'm glad you mentioned internet safety. Shared Hope has a lot of internet safety tools for both parents and guardians and youth. So I'll be sure to link those in the email.
Great.
And I think Barbara had something she wanted to add. And actually, Barbara, you're the next question. So if you want to add your comments, and I'll go ahead and
Okay.
ask your question.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yay! I tentatively asked, can you hear me? So yes, as I was listening to you speak, Sarah, I was listening, and I completely agree that parents need to have that difficult conversation with their children about the dangers of predators, whether it's online or in person at the mall, right? And I just wanted to say really briefly that it is a very difficult conversation. In particular, that word sex trafficking, parents, it can be for many parents a very difficult conversation to have. And also, unfortunately, many parents, again, I may believe that this would never, ever, ever happen. And I pray that it doesn't happen to anyone that's listening's family or a relative. I pray that it doesn't, but it does happen here in the United States. It's happening right now as we're speaking. And, I urge parents to consult with their child's school and urge them to offer trainings. And this topic can be addressed in every curriculum in the school system, from, believe it or not, from math to history. It can be interwoven and worked into all of these different curriculums. So I just wanted to say that, it is a difficult conversation for parents to have, but for any parents listening, I urge you to please have this conversation, with that child. And with it can be addressed in many different ways. I actually have a comic book series that's not graphic at all that brings up this topic, and it has an accompanying curriculum. So it's a comic book. It's for younger children in elementary school. And for those teenagers that parents think aren't listening to them, they might seem like they're very defiant and not listening. Probably they are defiant, but they are listening. Believe me, at some level, they're hearing what you're saying. So anyway, I just wanted to urge all parents to please bring up this topic. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks for that ad. I think it's really important to encourage parents because it is hard. It's really hard to have these conversations. Barbara, I have a question for you.
Which one?
Yeah, I have two questions in a row for you. I might actually,
Uh-oh.
no, we're going to do them. We're going to do them. We have about 20 minutes left, so we might have to cut some questions later, but we're going to make sure we get through some of these really important topics. So
I'll do my best.
Awesome. Thank you. Quickly, what are some of the resiliency factors that can help children and youth in the foster care system overcome the challenges of system involvement, and how can they thrive?
Oh, the resiliency fact, are you talking about while they're in the system or while they're aging out? I keep hearing the term aging out, which is, a very, very difficult topic to talk about. We could talk about that for hours, but are you talking about while they're within the system and while they're aging out, or just in general?
Yeah, while they're in the system and
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as I think of the foster care system and I feel for first of all, I'd like for us to honor the foster families and foster parents that have taken on this role. If we have attendees that are listening, I would like to say thank you, right? I would really like to say thank you for taking on that role. And I thank you and I honor you. And I feel, I just wanted to say that. So at any rate, the foster care system, and I don't want to be derogatory or negative here. I don't, but it is so complicated. And that, and I feel for families and parents that have taken on this role, and it can have so many different rules and regulations and players. And for a child that's in this system, who's coming into this system, not most likely, definitely traumatized in some way. First of all, they're taken away from their family, the family that they've known, right? So that alone, in and of itself, is trauma. That's it. That's a fact. And then you add on the fact that, whatever they've experienced that brought them to being taken out of their home and put into a completely new environment, with not just the home, the physical home, the neighborhood, the school, the family itself. Maybe there's other anyway, it's a whole new environment, and that's traumatizing in and of itself. And then what comes to mind, the different rules and regulations that the child has to go through, multiple different layers, and they're bound by these rules. They have to try to navigate through these different rules, and it's very risky. A child might feel afraid to say anything about the fact that they need to get their driver's license, or they need to do this, or they need to do that. And how do we do this? And how do I do that? Well, maybe I should just not say anything, because I don't want to be put into another placement. I don't want to be put into another home. I like it here, so it's risky, and it can be very complicated. So I think I just want to say, offering a lot more support and information for foster families and foster parents, so that they can navigate through these different multi-layered, all these different layers in the foster care system. And also listening to the child, listening to the children that are in these placements, that are in these homes, and not just assessing them, and but really seeing them and hearing what they're saying, and doing our best to address whatever it may be. I think oftentimes, we've addressed this issue, we've taken this child out of this situation, and good, they're in this safe place now. But that's not the end of it. There's a lot more involved here, and one of the main things is the child. Let's listen to this child and hear what they really need, right? And help them learn what they really need and support them, right? Anyway, that's just my thought on that.
Thank you. Did you want to jump right into talking about aging out? Just kind of defining what that means. It's an important gap where we need to make sure we're providing resources.
Yeah, you know, I think we've talked, we've really kind of, I've heard all of many of us talk about aging out and different aging out. What does that mean? How do we, what happens? You know, I think maybe people don't quite understand completely what that means, you know, here, or maybe they do, but you know, here's a child that's been put into this placement or maybe multiple placements, and they've reached a certain age, and now there they go, they're emancipated, they're out of the home, you know, and if or when this happens, if they need, the child needs to have plans in place. They have to have um, how can I say it, a family to come back to. They're not just leaving, you know, when a person grows up, you know, my neighbor's children across the street, they grow up, they come back to visit their parents, they come back to visit their grandmother, their siblings, and they're on, and it's a forever relationship, right? So with a foster child, it should be the same thing. It's not like, you're done, go off into the world now, you know, navigate your way through the world. You know, you've already experienced this horrific trauma in your early childhood, and you know, it's probably going to affect you forever in your life, but bye, here you go. No, they need to have a forever relationship, whether or not they've been adopted or whatever, or not, you know, that is my hope for all foster children, that they have someone to return to. You know, for me personally, being taken out of the home because of this sexual abuse that I experienced as a child, and I went through multiple group homes and different placements, that I managed to run away from all of them, each and every one but one. It was called Bonaire Reform School. It was in Richmond, Virginia. It's still there, actually. It was basically like a kind of like a prison for children, but I couldn't get out of that place. But at any rate, every place that I was put into, I would run away from. And you know, I was in all these different group homes, and I as I mentioned before, I was trafficked for over a decade. But when I did escape from New York and I came back to the DC area here, I I wanted to rebuild my life. At that point, I was around 23 or 24 years old, and I needed to learn how to rebuild my life. And because I'd been in all these different placements and different group homes, I didn't really have any relationships or any family to return to. That's the point I'm trying to make here in my roundabout way. I'm trying to say I didn't have anyone to mentor me. I didn't have those relationships in place. So I think it's so crucial that children aging out of the system don't just age out and go merrily on their way. You know, they don't, they shouldn't, it shouldn't be like that. You know, there need to be protocols in place. There need to be really, really, you know, my dream is that, you know, there's forever family relationships in place, you know, good mentoring, you know, positive role models in place, so that this young person can have a good, productive life. And that's just my thought.
Thank you. I think you are shining a light on something that so many of us can take for granted if we're not involved in these systems. I think it's a really important point to make, and I appreciate you sharing so we can understand that better. Do any of our other panelists want to address aging out and providing solutions, whether they're system organization level, with policymakers, community members, anything that we can do to better support youth that are aging out? Anything anyone want to add?
Yeah, it's Meiko. One of my roles here in Los Angeles, I'm actually the program manager, and I oversee a team of advocates that work with youth that are being trafficked, or they're at high risk for being trafficked and just haven't disclosed yet. And so we are seeing youth aging out of the system. I was a youth aging out of the system. And I know for my transition, what was really critical was having some of those independent living skills, and being able to tap into that, was having a place to go. I fortunately had a friend of a family friend who was willing to rent me a room while I put myself through college. And so I was able to, you know, be able to get a job, get enrolled in school, be connected to different, you know, community resources. And so with the program that I work with, we do try to connect the youth to resources as they transition out. But one of the things that I'm seeing, and I feel like that's just been an issue, and I don't have the solution, but I'm just throwing it out there, is that I really do feel like as I'm watching how the system works with youth, we're not often preparing them for what is about to happen when they turn 18 or they turn 21. I was 21 when I aged out. And so they're ill-equipped. I'm seeing a lot of youth that are running away with no care in the world about the fact that they're not staying at this placement. And I understand that there are multiple reasons why the youth may run, but then you have a social worker and this whole team that's working to find them a whole nother placement without them having a sense of what that really took to get them into the one that they're in the first place. And so then they turn 18 and they run from their transitional housing placement. And then there's no one there to go pick them up in the middle of the night and find a place for them to go. And they lack the resources, they lack the know-how, they lack the ability to advocate for themselves, to be able to really keep themselves safe, keep themselves connected, and really support themselves. And so I just think, as similar to what Barbara said, I don't want to, you know, talk bad about the system because I'm a product of the system to a certain degree. But I do feel like there is something lacking, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but there is a huge gap between the youth that are aging out and what the behaviors are that I'm seeing, and the lack of preparedness for real adulthood and what that's going to take. They just don't have the skills. And so she's right. There is a huge need for just support, and for them to continue to be wrapped around at the transitional stage, for sure.
Thanks so much for sharing. I wonder if you wouldn't mind jumping into kind of defining for our audience another layer of these youth that are involved in foster care system. There are some that are in our dual system, or that term. What does the data show about the link between foster care involvement and involvement in the juvenile justice system? Maybe you can define that a little bit for us. And why are so many youth dual system involved, and what can be done to help prevent that?
Yeah, so, you know, I had to look into that a little bit more myself, because even though I know that I work with youth that are dual system, I didn't know much about that topic. And so as I was kind of looking into it, just to kind of define it for people, dual system is where you have a youth that is in foster care, they have a foster care case that's open, but then they also have a probation or a juvenile justice case that's open. So they're in both systems. And there tends to be a link between childhood maltreatment and delinquent behavior. And so you do usually have a youth having a case open with foster care because of sustained neglect or abuse. And then with that being a link to them later having delinquent behaviors, then they end up getting involved with the justice system as well. And so with the youth who, so let me say this, in terms of the research that I found, it sounds like people are really looking at it more on a local level. And then they're taking that information and extrapolating it to kind of get a snapshot of what may be happening in the larger country. And so a study in 2015 conducted in several local jurisdictions around the country found that approximately 2/3 of the youth that were in the juvenile justice system in those districts, in those jurisdictions, actually had some level of contact with the foster care system as well. And so it's huge, the number of youth that are dual system involved. And why that poses an issue is because with the youth who are in both systems, they tend to be younger at the time of their first arrest, which means that they end up up being detained for more time, more often, and for longer periods of time. They're at higher risk for reoffending. They encounter frequent placements, so they're moving around from placement to placement and being placed in different group homes. They're more likely to have experienced school failure, which makes sense if you're not in the same place at all times. I mean, with COVID, everyone's kind of online with it, but before that, you get taken out of a group home, then you're probably moving to a whole, you could be an hour away. You're not going to stay connected to that school. And so there's things that get lost in translation. They tend to have more mental health problems, substance abuse issues as well, as compared to youth that are only encountering one system or the other. So it's a higher rate for youth that are in both systems. So some ways that that I found that were recommended that we can prevent that. I know here in Los Angeles, we take an approach that's called MDT, or multidisciplinary teams. I actually had to leave the MDT team for probation to be here today. And so what we do is that particular meeting happens once a week. They have one that's for DCFS and for probation. And so one thing that I noticed, or that I found in the research, is that different agencies weren't talking to each other. And so part of intervening with these youth and really getting them the services that they need is to have early identification that they're in both systems. And with agencies not talking to each other, that can be a challenge. So here in Los Angeles with the MDT teams, we bring everybody to the table. You may have the probation officer, the CSW, the social worker that may be a part of it, the advocacy agencies that address the CSEC, concerns that the youth are having or issues that they're having. You may have the therapist, you may have the attorney of the youth. So they're all coming to the table to discuss the cases. And then as a group, they make recommendations to the court on how to support this youth and what we should be doing to move them forward. I also think just the power of mentoring, right? Karen mentioned earlier, building on their strengths. And so definitely getting them connected to positive activities, things that can ground them in positive peers as well is super important. Reducing the length of the time that they're detained. Definitely with COVID here in LA, they are like not trying to have kids in juvenile hall as much as possible. So we do see a lot of youth who are offending or doing different things, violating their probation, but they're not going to juvenile hall as frequently as they might have because they're trying to reduce the population there. But I think that can be a good thing to get them connected to services rather than detaining them. Early detection and development of stronger case plans to address the youth's needs, helping strengthen the family, because this needs to be a concerted approach, and then reducing the number of youth in out-of-home placement. So those are some of the recommendations that I found in my research as it related to supporting dual system youth.
Thanks very much, Meiko, and thanks for sharing. Sarah messaged me. She's got another comment as well.
Yeah, so this is such an important topic, and I want to highlight two reasons that this is important when it comes to youth who are in the foster care system and are also experiencing trafficking or exploitation. The first is because we have this whole movement, this whole legislative movement called Safe Harbor. And if you want to learn more about Safe Harbor generally, Shared Hope just released their advanced legislative framework. You can find out a lot more about what your state is doing in terms of Safe Harbor and other victim protections. But basically, the idea is that kids who are experiencing sexual exploitation are not prostitutes, and they should not be criminalized for what they are, for their actions. Instead, they should be treated as victims. But yet, what we see over and over across the entire country is that implementation of that is extremely messy and difficult, because these are the kids who are dual system involved. So these are the kids who, yes, we might now call them child welfare kids. We see them as a victim in some senses, but they're often still in the juvenile justice system. And very often, they are still in the juvenile justice system for acts that relate to their trafficking. And so this is a key problem area that we all need to be working on. And I'm speaking as a policymaker here, but I'm also speaking as someone who has been an advocate for many years, this is a key area that we still have not conquered by any means. The other thing is kind of related to that. There is another great resource that I want to plug, which is the very recent Victim Offender Intersectionality report that Shared Hope published. And that this is a really difficult topic because there's such a continuum, right? Kids can be involved in juvenile justice because of things like running away or petty theft or truancy or different things like that, right? Or they can be involved in the juvenile or criminal justice system because the trafficker made them commit criminal acts, right? Or they can be involved because they're actually being charged with things like solicitation or prostitution or loitering or things like that in states where there's not full immunity for kids. Or they can be charged, and very often are, with trafficking. So they are a trafficking victim and a trafficker at the same time. So just to mind bender, all of you who do this work know this very well, but this dual systems involved piece is key. And when we leave out our juvenile justice partners in these conversations and focus only on the social services side or the foster family side or that kind of thing, we're really only getting part of the piece because our kids are there too. They are absolutely there too. And until we change that, we change the laws and we find a way to implement them, they're still going to be there. So I don't mean to divert the topic, but I think folks need to understand that piece of it when we talk about dual systems involved kids.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that additional information. I think it's really important what you added. We can link some of those Shared Hope resources that you mentioned, like the VOI report. So thank you for including that. We are out of time. I have to put my organizer hat back on. This has been a really amazing conversation, and I so appreciate everything that our panelists shared with us today. If you could all take like 20 seconds to give me your quick, here's what we want people to take away. Meiko, I'd also love for you to just mention the prevention curriculum that you have, because I think prevention is really important. It's a topic we didn't get to talk about yet today. So Meiko, do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just commend everyone who did join this call and take the time to just educate themselves, because I do think awareness is super important. And that is the key to really moving the needle as it relates to this issue. As it relates to the Power Project, we do a lot of training. We partner with schools, we partner with community centers, we partner with government agencies like DCFS, also going into the actual school districts and different things like that and doing training. We train kids from 6th up through 12th grade, also transitional age youth. And we also train staff. So we have CSEC 101, 102. We do an engagement, strategies on engagement. How do you work with youth that have actually been trafficked? And then we also have training for parents. So parents who may have a youth that actually was trafficked. So we do training around that and how do they navigate that and helping walk their youth back to health when that child comes home. And so we've been really fortunate enough. Like I said, I worked at a national human trafficking organization prior to launching the Power Project, where we trained all over the country, over 26,000 people trained within the 2 years that I was at that organization, and just continuing to go out and raise awareness. Our training really focuses on giving back to youth the things that trafficking tries to take away. So whether that's addressing online recruitment, whether that's addressing healthy relationships, the grooming process, we want to come in and talk about those things. And what we find is that as you create these brave spaces for youth to come in and hear about what's happening, they do a couple of things. They either now have a name for what's been happening to them, or they can recognize what's happening with their peers, or they can recognize that they're in the process of being recruited. And we're seeing kids disclose and start to seek help. And you finally have someone standing in the room that understands your story, and it creates a space where they feel like they can talk about what's been happening to them. And so kids can take it. Have the conversation, get over your discomfort with the word sex and having this conversation because it's super important. I am a mother of an 11-year-old, and I've had this conversation with him. It was super uncomfortable, but I'm more of the mindset that I would rather drive the narrative about what he understands about himself and the world and trafficking versus having the world tell him, because if you don't, someone else is going to give him that information, so it might as well be you. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm so honored that I was able to speak today and be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Meiko. We'll be sure to link the Power Project in the post-webinar email. Barbara, what's your 30-second takeaway?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good. Just checking. My 30 seconds. Okay. My 30 seconds. First of all, I'd like to quickly say thank you to all my fellow panelists and for being here. I'm just honored to be here with you and to hear all your words and what you had to share. It's really powerful and very important. And, you know, I have to say thank you for all the attendees for hearing and being here and listening to this important information. You know, my takeaway is, once again, we need to listen to the children that are being placed and moved and taken here and taken there, and we need to support them and as they grow up, hopefully in a productive, loving environment, and they age out. We discussed aging out at length here. We talked about that quite a bit. As they age out, to support them in living a productive, fantastic life, right? And I mean, that's my few seconds there. You know, as far as coming back to me, what I have to offer. If anybody's interested, I have multiple trainings, multiple initiatives, and a lot of information that I offer. I train law enforcement, medical personnel, first responders. I have different initiatives and different, a whole bunch of resources, multiple resources. My book, Nobody's Girl, is a best-selling memoir. Please watch my TED Talk. It offers a lot of information about this topic. And yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Barbara. We'll be sure to link that in our post-webinar email too.
Thank
Karen?
you.
Yes, and I would also like to echo what Barbara said about being on this panel. It was an honor for me to be with all of you lovely ladies, and I'm very honored to be a part of it. And I think one of the takeaways would be that when we are looking at training foster parents, I think sex trafficking absolutely needs to be part of their training. I think talking about why foster children are at such high risk, all of the reasons, that needs to be included. And I would also say that we, as foster parents, the system, the child welfare system, needs to let foster parents know as much as possible about what the child has experienced before being placed in their home. And I think that would also help us understand the kinds of trauma or traumas that these children have experienced.
Thank you, Karen. Sarah?
Yeah, so if you are not a foster parent right now, consider becoming a foster parent. No matter what your role is, create spaces of belonging for youth. That is the most important thing that we all can do with the youth who are in our lives, whether we are child protection workers, foster parents, or any other role that you have. If you interact with youth, create spaces of belonging. That is our #1 protective factor for youth, so that they will be at lower risk for trafficking and exploitation. And finally, if you are in the child welfare field and you want to get an idea of what the response to trafficking and exploitation can look like, please feel free to visit our Minnesota Department of Human Services Safe Harbor site. I will go ahead and send information along with follow-up email on that as well. Thank you so much for
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, everyone who attended. We so appreciate you staying on with us for 96 minutes. It's been wonderful to have you. Everyone was really engaged. We got a lot of Q&As, so we hope to follow up with some of those post-webinar via email. We will be sending out a survey after this webinar, so we really appreciate your feedback. We definitely review it to help build our better program. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you to our panelists, and have a wonderful rest of the day.